Hey, everybody, welcome to Contra Talk. My name is Richard Henry, and this is the podcast where we talk about things that matter. And something that matters a lot to me, and I think to you too, since you did click on this video, is music. Worship. Is worship only music or music part of worship? How does that look? What does that sound like? How do we understand this modern place we live our lives in? Well, we talked to a first-time guest today and the mind behind Reawaken Hymns online. He's got a great presence on Spotify, YouTube, many other places as well. Great website with lots of resources for churches, as well as things that you can purchase for your own use and everything else. Nathan Drake. He is also a husband, and his wife is a talented musician as well, and they spend their time creating much good music and reawakening music from the past for the Lord's glory and our good. I hope you enjoy this conversation where we talk about different things regarding what a good song is, what isn't, is only old good stuff good or bad, or new stuff good or bad, what's a good worship song, why should we sing hymns, and everything else. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. All right, Nathan Drake, welcome to the show, brother. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about music and worship and hymns. But for those who don't know you, they might. You've got a pretty big presence online and a big website and other things. And very talented musician. But why don't you just tell us who you are and what you do, what keeps you busy?
Yeah, so I am Nathan Drake. You already said that part. I am a worship leader, and I have an online ministry resource providing place called Reawaken Hymns, and I do modern, updated versions of old hymns, very specifically for like churches that use modern instruments and have modern worship, whatever you want to call that. But there's guitars involved, we'll say that much. So yeah. I make updated versions of classic hymns, all the ones from the hymnal, Nothing But the Blood, Come That Found, all that. I do updated versions so that modern churches can still play those in worship, and is a big part of worship. And so I'm the musician, so I make the arrangements, I play the music, but there's also tons of resources. Like I have a website, reawakenhymns.com, where there's all kinds of stuff. So that's what I do.
Yeah. Now, how long have you been playing music for? Did you grow up doing it, I assume?
Yeah, I've been playing music most of my life, since I was a teenager. I mean, I got a guitar when I was 15 for the same reason every 15-year-old boy gets a guitar, because he thinks girls like guitars. So, which didn't work, weirdly. I don't know why. But yeah, so I've been playing music since I was like 15. And then I've been leading worship for, 10 or 15 years, somewhere in there.
Okay. Is your wife a musician as well?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Those often go hand in hand. A lot of times couples will be both musicians, or one's a singer or whatever. Yeah, no, that's good. And I love your work. I've listened to your stuff for years.
Thank you.
And we just reached out, or I just reached out, and I was like, man, I want to talk about music. And that's, really what I want to talk about, because I don't know, you get in obviously a Baptist church or Bible church, non-denominationals, they're all kind of the same. You'll get a worship leader or a worship pastor or a music pastor or a music leader, music director. And there's this kind of, well, what are we supposed to do? I mean, we see the Psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, but then there's a lot of times, and I've not done a deep study on it, but you look at, Acts. I've been preaching through Acts the last couple of years off and on, and taking some breaks in between. But, seeing what the early churches and how they're building, and the persecution and the glories and the just neat, amazing things that God's doing through people, officially establishing the church and all that. And rarely do I see music involved. Food's involved, teaching's involved, reading the scriptures involved. And we'll get to a couple kind of more contentious questions and some questions I have as far as what the most divisive thing has been over the last couple hundred years in the church, but music's fascinating because it's amazing and we all love it. But then there's this level of, well, I don't like this, and we get these preferences right off the bat. I'm up front. I do the call to worship, and I remain up front, and I'll see, usually guys, and they're like this. It's like, what are you doing? Like, this is a service unto the living God. We're worshiping Christ, and you're there grumpy, and it's just, anyway, that's a little hobby horse maybe for me, but just, well, I guess maybe kind of, sorry. One thing is, why are you doing this? Why have you spent your life, as it were, at least some of your life, reawakening the hymns? I mean, we have Hillsong and Bethel, and we have all these other ones, and Jesus, 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 I love these songs, yada, yada, yada. These are new songs, Nathan. Why would you, those are old, dusty, boring songs. What do you say to somebody who's like, why would you waste your time with that? Why would you waste your time with hymns? Hey, it's me from the thing you're currently watching. If you're liking this video, are you? I hope you are. If you're not, pretend like you are and hit the like button anyway. Also, if you really want more videos and to know when the next one comes, you got to hit the little notification somewhere down here. So hit like, notification, and do me a solid, which is a weird thing to say, really, if you think about it. Click subscribe. Back to the show.
Sure, yeah. Could you ask me a larger question, please?
Yeah.
So, where to start? I do this. Let me start with the history of why I do this, first of all. Simply because I was in a church. This is just where it started. I was in a church that was, I don't say it's an older church. There were some younger people, some older people, but it wasn't like there were hymn singers, we'll say that much, lots of them.
Yeah.
But it was a contemporary church. It had been planted semi-recently, so hymns weren't a part of this particular church's DNA, but they were of the people who were in this church plant, if that makes sense. So I wanted to put those two together, and when I started doing that like 10 years ago, there actually wasn't a huge amount of resources of hymns that were modernized but not changed a bunch. Like there were people like Indelible Grace doing it, and I love Indelible Grace. They do awesome work, but they rewrite the hymns, which is awesome, but it's not what I wanted, because then it's a new song. It's not something they already knew. So I just kind of started making my own arrangements, putting them online, that sort of thing, because I wanted these people to be able to sing these songs. So that was just how it started. That's a really simple explanation how it started. And then it grew, and my intentions were deeper than that too, and they still are by far. It's that there's a lot of reasons, but one is that hymns contain, in general, a wider berth of theology and topics and scriptures than modern songs do in general. At least they used to. We'll get into all that. Sometimes for good and sometimes for bad. Like, it's great to have all these biblical topics to explore, but sometimes they made entire songs about, like, pulling up wheat, which is not a song we really need to sing in worship, to be honest with you. Like, it went both ways, but and then also just because they're good songs and they're good art, and it's something that is weirdly kind of unique to music, and even more so and much more so to worship music, is that for some reason old art is bad. Like, I don't walk into a museum and be like, oh, I wish I could like that Van Gogh, but it's like 200 years old, so let me see the new stuff. Like, I don't do that because it's good art, and these hymns are good art. They've got a bad rap from the way they were done for a long time, and I think that's what happened. And so I'm just trying to kind of bring them back. And it's not really about the music. It is about the music, but it's not at the core about the music. It's about bringing the passion back to the hymns, and like, hey, these are good songs. Like, these are just good songs. There's a whole lot more that goes into it, but I think we'll talk more about that. So I don't want to go everywhere right now. So
no, that's okay. I guess the question and I've pondered this myself, even in seminary, and then coming into a church for the first time, pastoring a church. And I love music. I'm not musically trained at all. Maybe I'd be good at it if I was trained at it, but no, I feel like I'm way too behind. I'm not going to pick up piano or guitar. I can't do it. I mean, I probably could, but anyway, I love music though, and but then there's even in churches or you visit or places I've preached before I've pastored, and some songs are fantastic and they're just good and they're just rich, and some songs are not, and it doesn't always mean an old song's good and a new song's bad, or opposite, an old song's bad and a new song's good. Just because it's new doesn't mean it's good. Just because it's old doesn't mean it's good. And a lot of people I think have that, where like you have to have an organ or you have to have a piano, and of course, the worship wars, whatever it was, I guess the late 90s or the 2000s, where people were maybe transitioning more the seeker sensitive, I guess, movement, and some of that, we need to have drums, we need to have a fog machine, we need to do these other things. What's the difference really between a worship song? You're driving down, in your car and it comes on the radio, K-Love or whatever, versus a hymn or even a psalm. What are the differences between those that you would say?
Yeah, I mean, from a purely semantic viewpoint, a hymn and a worship song aren't any different. They're the same thing. I mean, the definition of a hymn, I think if you looked it up, would be a worship song. Like that's like the Webster definition of it. The psalm would be different. That's a bit different. It tends to be a poem, and we have the psalms, so we view that as that. But as far as like what in general the kind of connotations of both that we put on them, or the definitions that we of modern American Christians have on those two things now, is that a hymn is really just, for a lot of people, it's just an older song. Even that I don't think is, hopefully we can change that. And then a worship song is a new song, but there's also a bit of that's just the style of the song. For instance, I think most people, if I ask them what is In Christ Alone a hymn or a worship song, they would say it's a hymn, but it was written in like 2001, so it is a new song. But it is
really
written.
I didn't know it was that new. That's
Yeah,
one of my favorite songs.
Yeah, it was written by Geddes, which they're still doing stuff. So yeah. I think 2001 something. It was in the 2000s. How Deep the Father's Love, same thing. That was written very recently. But we view these as hymns because they fit that format of what we've known, is that there's a bunch of verses and we sing each verse the same way. There's usually not a chorus, although there's a lot of choruses in hymns. Written in hymnal, written in 4-part harmony, this and that and this and that. And what we relate to those two things is usually, the point here is that it's musical style. It's not usually anything else. It's just a hymn is a song that sounds like this, and a worship song is a song that sounds like this. In general, this one sounds like Hillsong, and this one sounds like the thing you fell asleep at your grandpa's church while he was singing. Like, those are the definitions of those two things to us. So I part of what I want to do with Reawaken hymns, which doesn't make sense because I put hymn in my name, but I had to because that's what people know, is that I don't want that definition to really exist so much, as at least as far as we are defining those two things. Like when I choose songs for my worship service, I don't want to think about if it's a hymn or not, because why should I? Like, there's no there's no point. They're all worship songs. It's just when they were written and what musical style they are. So I don't want that definition when I plan worship. I'm looking at bigger, more important things, like, what does this song say? Can my church sing it? Is it singable? Those are the two big things. Is it a good song? Like, these are the things I'm looking at. Whether it's a hymn as we defined it or worship song we defined it, I try not to care at all. So it's, again, I think we have put those definitions on it, but I don't think they're necessary. And as far as the actual definition of the word, there is no difference between a hymn and a worship song. A hymn is just a worship song. It's the same thing. So,
gotcha. So I guess maybe some people would say, well, but there is, because I don't like hymns. We open the hymnal and I don't like this one. And to be fair, there are hymns that were written in the 70s and earlier that were they're just bad songs. So, just because it's old doesn't mean it's good, or just because it's old doesn't mean it's bad, right? So I guess what I'm hearing you say is, like, it's really structure. Like, a hymn is more structured, whereas a modern worship song or contemporary, maybe would be a better word, contemporary song is there's more choruses and things like that. Is that kind of what you're what you mean?
As far as we defined it, yeah, that's not a real definition. I mean, in the words, that doesn't mean anything. Every single song we sing in a worship service is a hymn. It just is, but that's not how we define it. So yes, in general, I think people define hymn as a structured song that is a certain musical style, in which really one of the big things is that the melody is the thing in a hymn. Like, it's all the melody. Whereas a lot of modern worship songs, there's a lot more into the music, and the melody just sits on top of that, if that makes sense. Like, hymns are built around the melody,
Okay.
and some modern music is built around the music and the melody, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no,
It's
does.
also
Okay.
subjective. I mean, because we're just trying to find something that people have defined from musical style, and it's so hard to. I mean, we all know, though. That's the funny thing. If I say, we're going to sing some hymns in church, like, people know what I'm talking about. So
Right.
people, but it's not what it is.
Yeah. Interesting. What would you define? What would make a good song overall, according to your theology and practice, and looking at scripture and seeking to build a worship service? What makes a good song for Nathan, the artist, the musician?
Yeah. So when I'm choosing songs for worship, I mean, there's a ton of things I look at, but so the one big single sentence statement that I will use for evaluating a song, and this is very ethereal, not concrete things, but I would say, I know, right? This is the big philosophical question I ask first, and then I ask all the detailed questions. Does this song promote a deeper knowledge of and a deeper connection with Christ? So does it promote a deeper knowledge of and a deeper connection with Christ? And that's just a really long way of saying spirit and truth. That's the same thing. A deeper knowledge of truth, a deeper connection with spirit. And I ask myself that almost as like a centering point, because I swing one way, and I think everybody in the world swings one way of spirit and truth. Often, denominational. If you're a Presbyterian, you're all about the truth and you forget the Holy Spirit exists. If you're a Pentecostal, you probably go the other way. Like, so it could be our personalities, it could be whatever. But I swing towards truth, which isn't probably surprising since I do Reawaken hymns. And I kind of forget that, hey, you know what? This worship song is not just about teaching who God is, but it's also about connecting with him. Like, if I'm just going to teach, then I can step off and the preacher can come up and we're all good. But the song part of this is also to connect. Like, those are spirit and truth are right there together. So that's kind of the big ethereal statement. I say the big philosophical statement. Does this promote a deeper connection with and deeper knowledge of Christ? And then after that, I'll go into all the specific details of it. Like, number one, does the song have good and correct theology? Like, if it's not biblical, it's in the trash. There's no reason for it to be there. Is it singable by my church? Because again, that's the point. Like, if we can't sing the song, why are we singing the song? Then I'll go to more tiny details. Like, is it subjective or objective? Does it say we or I? Is it group focused? Is I focused? What member of the Trinity is it on? Like, so after that big statement, there's all these things I go through that kind of vary from like super important. If it's bad theology, it's out totally, to just guiding principles. Like, is it I versus we? Like, I'll just make sure that I don't have all one or the other in a worship service. So there's a ton of things.
That's good. Well, yeah, I would definitely. I had a hunch that's how you more or less would answer, based on obviously having the value in the hymns, because most hymns generally are older songs, if you will, are more focused. They're less on. They don't care about the radio. Now, sure, in Christ alone, and this is my Father's world or something like that. Those are newer songs, as you said, which I didn't even. I mean, maybe I knew that, but anyway. But that's good, because it is, and that's something that we'll get to here in a second, with just a worship service. Because even as a pastor, or serving in a musical capacity or any other thing, what are we doing when we go to service? I was talking with my wife last night. We stayed up pretty late last night just talking about random stuff. And service, why do we call it a service? Like you go to the restaurant, the server, the waitress serves you, right? You have servants. They do something for you. And so when we're in a service, how I understand it, we're serving God. We're serving the triune living God through psalms, hymns, spiritual songs, right? Through preaching, through the proclamation of the word, through reading scripture, through prayer, through giving. It's a serving. And I think so many times people are just, the opposite of serving is a similar word, right? Selfishness or self, right? And so, and I see it, and I've seen it in many churches, including the one I pastor. It's just like, I don't think your focus is right here. You're missing it, because why are we even here? What do we? Well, I'm worshiping God. A lot of times people think, and I want to ask you this kind of impromptu question. We miss it, but I want to say, like, what do you think? Why do you think worship? People only equate music with worship, not giving, not preaching, not reading scripture, not responsive reading, not, a call to worship, not changing a diaper in the nursery or doing a Bible study or a witnessing or anything else. Why is music seen as worship? You have the worship pastor or the worship director, on a staff page. But
yeah, I don't have
what do you
any
think?
idea where that came from. It's got to just, I don't think it's, honestly, I don't think it's anything intentionally philosophical. Like somebody sat down one day and was like, you know what, music's worship and the rest isn't. Like, I think at some point, I think it probably had to do with the advent of modern worship. See, I'm using that word right now of like modern
See, yes,
worship music.
we're all brainwashed.
Right.
Yeah.
I think during that period, they started using the word worship in correlation with the music, which is perfectly fine because the music is worship. And at some point, all of our collective minds just kind of turned the word worship to music, and the word, and with no ill intention, but unfortunately, it has had bad consequences because we've gotten so far into that now we so equate the word worship with music that we've forgotten that the music is just a portion of the worship. So I think that was just a bad. I don't think it was intentional by anybody. I think it just slowly happened as people started, using worship leader and words like that. And interestingly, even the word like worship leader, like that is a term that, though it's not biblical, like there's no office of the worship leader in the Bible, it is a thing that existed in that somebody would sit down, like let's say the New Testament church, there would be a worship leader and just the literal person who said, here's what we're doing now. Here's what we're doing now. I'm going to read this now. Will you talk now? Like there was like an MC, like we would say, or just a host. Like that is the worship leader. And that's still how I personally look at and teach worship leaders to view themselves, is that they are like, MC is bad connotations, but you're the MC of the service in that you're the guide. Like, and again, this is how your church structures things, but I think it's healthy. Like you're not just standing up there and playing music. You are thinking through every portion of the service, how it fits together, what it's teaching, what it's saying, how it's connecting with people, the scriptures, the music, the words, all of this. You're a worship leader in the sense that you are leading the worship service, not that you're the music leader. And I think it would be very healthy to separate those two words, a music leader and a worship leader. Because in our churches, they're usually the same person, but they're not the same thing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and it depends on really your denomination or your just background individually, because you'll see, I mean, sometimes you won't see the pastor at all until the sermon. Sometimes he'll do the call to worship or something else, or he'll come up and introduce, or he'll be up on stage, or he won't. Or there,
but in a lot of cases, the pastor would be the worship leader, like
right,
because you're guiding the service, even though you're not doing the music. You're the worship leader, and then you have a music guy, like
Yeah, that is a good distinction. Yeah, I like that. You mentioned teaching. So are you teaching as well, or instrumentation? Do you like classes or through your website, or?
I mean, yeah, I'll do YouTube videos. They're teaching. I currently am teaching a worship leading cohort for NAM. That's kind of smaller church worship leaders, and then I'll teach at conferences and stuff like that. But so just just in general, when I do that, yeah.
Do you, just back to our question a moment ago, the function of worship and how that kind of got merged with music. Have you engaged with that at all, or other people had that question, or how would you maybe teach out of that to try and undo some of those maybe unintentional decisions with music as worship and nothing else as worship, and that kind of paradigm?
I mean, one thing immediately, if I was talking to worship leaders, which we noticed today, I would ask them, "Hey,
Yeah.
I would say, hey, are you the worship leader or are you the music leader?" And most of them would be like, "I don't understand your question," which is fine. So I'd say, "Are you playing music or are you guiding the service and reading scripture and praying and all that and making sure everything's going, like you're the guide of the service?" So that's, I think that just in that we expand of like, oh, maybe I'm just the music guy, which is totally fine. In some churches and a lot of small churches, the pastor is the worship leader and the music guy is the music guy, and that is completely fine. Like, that's great. We just got to think that way. So I think that's a big one, is to guide worship leaders to actually be worship leaders instead of music people if they're supposed to be. There's nothing wrong with just being a music guy, but let's make that a distinction. I think that's a good start, because if the worship leading music world gets that idea of those are two separate things, then I think that'll kind of weed off into other people, and even like using the term worship leader for somebody who never plays music in a service will make people think about what the idea of a worship leader is.
Yeah, he's the worship leader, but he's not playing the guitar. What's going on? Yeah.
He's the music minister. That's the worship leader.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and then the words minister and director and pastor. Oh my goodness.
Oh boy, yeah.
We're so ridiculous. That, I mean, I will say with Roman Catholics, they do have one point of that with, the contention and argumentation from their side towards Protestants is there is so much fracturing and so much just we don't know what we want. We all say we're the Bible and this, and yet at the same time, most often we're doing something counter to the scripture and something else. And well, it's not here. Like, but you said you're a Bible Christian. Anyway, well, not in that instance. Anyway, looking at the last couple hundred years. So obviously, 5 years ago, Martin Luther. 506 years ago. 507 years ago, 15, 17. No, 6. Sorry. Can't do that. Clearly, there was some good things, and I've had some conversations recently about one Anglican who's very Protestant, but was like the Reformation failed in the sense of reforming the church. Now there's all sorts of other things, and I'm still thankful of guys like Luther and others who pushed against. Of course, he was a musician as well and wrote hymns and things. But that did, admittedly, really fracture the church, and the Roman Catholic Church was terrible. I mean, heresy and all sorts of just superstition, just bad stuff. Almost nothing biblical at all. Of course, my Roman Catholic friends would disagree, but that's what history says, so we'll go with that. But with that, allowed 100 years later with the Church of England and the Puritans and trying to purify the church, and then eventually coming over to the New World, and then in the 1700s, and the 1800s, and the 1900s, and more stuff. And really, I'd say in the last 200 years, maybe even 300 years, with music, worship, quote unquote, piano, no piano, organ, not drums, no, the worship wars from 20, 30 years ago, the seeker-sensitive movement in general, but even 100 years before that, with people speaking in tongues and just outbursts of singing and on and on and on and on and on, that I would contend, and I want to get your opinion on it, that music, not soteriology, though, some people might disagree, Calvinism, Arminian, whatever, not eschatology, not baptism, but music, worship has been the most contentious issue in the church, especially the Western Protestant church, in the last few hundred years. What do you think about that?
You said a lot of things. Okay, you're gonna have to keep me on track, because I have to. You keep me on the question you just asked, because I got to go back a little bit, because something you mentioned is interesting to me.
I know I have long questions. I'm sorry.
It's great. So I was thinking about this recently, and I'm not a church historian by any stretch of the imagination. So what I'm about to say might be wrong, but I don't think it is. I'm pretty sure, from what I've read, and I think some people forget this, that music in services hasn't been participatory for most of church history from the time of Jesus. And that's something that the Reformation did do, is that they said, hey, you know what? Maybe just the priest shouldn't sing. Or maybe just those dudes doing Gregorian chant up front shouldn't sing. Maybe we should all sing. And we did, and we still do. So whether it failed or not, I don't know, but it did not fail the music, in my opinion, because, again, music, I mean, the core of, like, when worship leaders talk, they're like, but it's all about singing together. It's all about singing together. That's all it is. We forget that that's new. Like, that's a new concept as far as the post-Jesus world has been. Like, the Jewish temples had music, tons of music in them. I don't know how participatory the music was there. I don't know if you know. Do you have any idea?
I don't. I mean, I know there were offices,
Yeah.
and obviously the psalms are loaded. I mean, most of them were to be sung, or
I would guess it was, because we know that, like, the
read.
Israelites would sing songs as they went to the temple themselves.
Uh-huh.
So you would assume they did
There
that
was
when
probably
they were
some
there.
for sure.
So I
Yeah,
would guess.
I wouldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
probably not in every situation, but I would say, yeah, probably more so than not.
Yeah, and then I think, again, not her church historian, this is my broad idea of what I've read. Once we had Jesus, we had the early church, and then once the Roman Catholic Church really solidified in, like, the 300-400s or whenever it was, they kind of went to the, and we all know this, it kind of went to the priest is the person who does everything, and the people just watch. And that included music too. And we would have monks and priests and stuff that were set to sing, and nobody else would sing. So we had this huge gap in church history of people not singing in worship until the Reformation came around. So that foregone conclusion of, we're like, well, that's just the point of corporate worship. We all sing together. That's new. That's new. And I think it's the right way. I think it's good, but I think we need to realize that this is a much bigger history than we think about, you know? And I think and I think that we fight about these things, going back to your question here, is we fight about these things, of these details of music. And we forget to think that, you know what, we still all sing in worship, no matter the denomination. For the most part, worship is still 100% for people to sing together. Like, I've never been in a church in America. I'm sure they exist, but I've never been into a church in America where I got there and one person stood up front and sang, and nobody in the congregation sang the whole time. I've never been in that church, but that's how it always used to be. So I think we need to, first of all, let's celebrate the win before we get all divisive on each other, which we do. Like, hey, we still all do the same thing that didn't used to happen. That's amazing. We still all sing together. Like,
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I think just backing up and getting those perspectives can help us to be less divisive about these things, because then we might be like, okay, so they're singing 200-year-old songs and won't sing new ones, and they're singing all Hillsong and won't sing old songs. But you know what? They're all still singing together. Like, that in itself is amazing as far as church history is concerned.
That's true.
So I think that's a big part of it. Okay, now let me go to the end of your question, where you're talking about that music is the most divisive thing. And I would agree, maybe not the most, but definitely one of them, you know, in times.
Top three.
Yeah. Top three. One big reason for that, for sure, is that music is the most emotional part of a worship service in general for a lot of people, because that's the point of music. Like, music is built from the ground up to incite emotions. That's basically the point of it. I mean, all music, like from Bach to Beethoven to the Beatles to our worship music to whatever, that music is built to create emotions. It just is. Like Beethoven didn't write the Moonlight Sonata so you could look bored while you were listening to it. He wanted to incite emotions. That's the point of music. And really, it's the point of all art. So, first of all, I tend to be a person, this is another side note, I tend to be a person who's like, oh, emotion's bad in music, and I forget that, hey, that's the point, you know, like, chill out, Nathan. But so I think that's one of the reasons, is that everyone gets so easily emotionally attached to the music and when we get emotionally attached to things, they become divisive when we change them. And as someone who changes beloved songs that people love, I get this. I don't change. I'll tell you,
change it for the better.
I don't. Oh, thank you for that. And I don't change the words. I don't change the melody. I just change the music. And still, some people think I am sent from Satan to destroy the church. Like,
really?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Because there's I'll get comments like, hey, I sing this at my grandma's funeral. How dare you ruin this beautiful song? Like and I completely understand that sentiment. I maybe don't say it on
Wow.
YouTube a comment section, but I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
But it's because people get really emotionally attached to music because that's what it's for. So I think that's one of the reasons it's the most divisive thing, because when, let's say, you change your call to worship from this to this, like some people who really think about it will be like, oh, we should do this and this. But most people aren't emotionally attached to whether you read it out of this book or whether you did it in this style. If you say you changed it from a responsive reading to reading a psalm, like nobody's going to have emotional attachments to those things. Whereas
unless
if you
they're King James only.
Unless they're King James only, but we'll talk about that.
Sorry.
I don't know if that's an emotional attachment or not, but it's something.
Somebody gets emotional.
They do get emotional, yeah. But if you change, a song from this style to this style, there's emotional attachments there. So I think that's a huge reason it's so divisive.
And that's a really good point. I never thought about that. Again, I'm not a musician. That's the point in music. Right. Yeah. And I think, and like you said, you even have to battle that in your own soul. Like, oh, I'm too emotional. Oh, shut up. Like telling that to yourself because, oh yeah, duh. I mean, in one sense, I think sometimes even as a preacher, as a pastor, and trying to bring a buffet of from the text, whether that's a topical sermon that we're jumping around or a singular, just moving verse by verse, I want to offer something that's not just a history lesson. Right. We're not just looking at the Old Testament or the New Testament and wow, that's really interesting about first century Palestine. Yeah. OK. No, it's how does this apply for us? And what does that mean for Christ and worshiping him? And how is he speaking to us right now? Not only us right now, we do need to know the context, but it can't be just one or the other. It has to be both. And I think a lot of times people will do that even with music. They'll want something that's only makes me feel good. You're like, I will forever and ever and ever in those types of songs.
Yeah.
And you get pumped up and people are clapping and it's just like, okay. And now that helps me, honestly, because I lean that way too, like truth, right?
Yeah.
Emotions are bad. Or be wary of emotions at least.
Yeah.
But that's good to remember. And I think probably that's helpful for a lot of people listening too, because that is the point. Like you said with Bach or Beethoven or anybody else, Mozart, like, oh, yeah, you do get teary-eyed. You do have that thing or that just warm fuzzies or whatever. And God made it and it's good. Right? I mean, it's not something that's bad.
Like if music wasn't supposed to incite emotions in us, then it wouldn't, because God created this thing. Like, and I think it's interesting. So I'll put us in the same camp here because I assume we are. We tend to react to the current state of some of the top 100, where these are churches using emotions as drugs to influence people. Like that's what they're about. I mean, that's what they're doing. That's what's happening in someone's brain. It's a drug. It is. That's how, and they're doing this. So, and that's bad, very bad. But people like us react the opposite way. And we're like, no one smile and worship.
Put your hands down.
What are you talking to? Stop, sing louder, sing quieter. Don't, yeah. And I do that too. You just said you did too. And we swing the other way because we're like, we see this evil thing happening. We're like, oh, let's get as far away from possible, but we should be right in the middle. And that's why I use that statement I said earlier, deeper knowledge of and deeper connection with. I need to be in the middle of both of those things. If I forget one of them, I've gone off track. So.
Yeah, that's super good. I appreciate you saying that because it is. And I would categorize, a song that way too. Because there's plenty of new songs that are great songs. And there's plenty of new songs that are trash. I think a lot of people, they have it and they think it or sing it just blindly or well, I listen on the radio, so of course it's good. And then you have churches, generally the more seekery type of churches, or they want to be. And then that's what they're trying to grab people with. And, in one sense, you can't I mean, part of me wants to say absolutely not. You should never do that. But at the same time, you still want to quote unquote advertise, you still want to be inviting, you still want to be welcoming, you still want to have something that might be familiar to someone, especially if there's somebody who's changing churches or checking out the faith, or they were invited by a friend or whatever. You don't want it to be completely foreign. And that's a struggle. And I had another conversation with a friend recently, who's part of the CREC. So I don't know if you know Doug Wilson and those guys. And it's kind of Reformed Baptist and Presbyterian mixed. And, we'll see how long that lasts in history. But it sounds good so far. But it's very, very focused on the whole body of Christ. This is what we're doing. We're worshiping. We're Christians. And to a critique, I would say it doesn't allow for, I think, anyone outside to come in. Not like they would ban them, and not to make this about that denomination per se, but from my experience, I've been to a conference and seen stuff, and it's very happy and jolly and great and fun, and they sing good songs and psalms and other things. But it seems if you get too focused, that there's no room for error for that for you to invite your friend to church, your neighbor next door, or the guy at work. Because it's all about you, and then we're confessing our sin, and we're doing all this stuff, and it's a lot of up and down responsive reading, which I'm all for. But again, if I can have my perfect world, I'd want to have somewhat of a balance, because I would 100% agree that the worship service is for Christians. We're to be equipped. This is the rallying cry. We're worshiping Christ together. We're partaking of the bread and wine together, or the grape juice, all that together, and then we're going out. But unbelievers do come in, or people who went to church years ago and they want to hear. But if your focus is only on the unbeliever, it's always evangelistic. It's always first grade, second grade theology. And then people who care more, like, why are we singing better songs? Why are you preaching longer or deeper or more convictionally? I'm out, and you continue to just get first, second grade maturity level, even though you have 40, 50, 60-year-olds in there. And now what do you do? I mean, I think that's far worse to have that than the former of a more convictional, more narrow, closed communion type of environment where it's only for Christians. Anyway.
And I think kind of what we just spoke about speaks to that too. Like, let's say you have worship services are for Christians. We would agree on that. But also, hey, come to my church.
Right. Yeah.
I think if, again, those extremes can help us in that. So just speaking to people I know who aren't Christians, they can see through that music is a drug sort of emotionalism church so quickly, really quickly. And that's
true.
They see manipulation and they run. And then on the other side, if you go to a church that is completely focused on the truth and not the spirit, and you have a bunch of people saying these amazing truths and not caring about them at all emotionally, they'll see through that too. They're like, you're just reciting things. This isn't, you don't believe this. If you believe that you were saved from all your sin, you'd be happy about it, not so mad about everything in service. Like, so, in that middle ground, if people come into your church and they see people saying deep truths and then having deep emotions to react to them, that tells them this is real. Like, cause that's how it works. If you hear a deep truth like that, you have a deep emotion about it. If your wife tells you she loves you, you feel that emotion. You hear a deep truth, you feel a deep emotion. Like, that's, you know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, no, that's good. And I would argue or say also, or add to rather, coupling that with hospitality and friendliness and smiling. Like you just said, your sins are forgiven. God became a man and dwelt among us. Like, let that sink in for a second. Like, God, the God who made all things and upholds all things, for whatever reason he wanted to, added humanity to himself, and not just to like be a king here on earth and live in the temple forever, to be brutally murdered on a bloody Roman rack. What? Like, if you just stop and think about that, like, everything else just passes away. And of course, there's countless songs about that. When you focus on Christ, the things of earth grow strangely dim. I don't know what song that is, but something like that. And it's like, you just want to take people sometimes. But anyway.
Yeah, and then when you hear that, and then the person's response is, "Yeah, but I don't like the drums. Something's going wrong."
Yeah, exactly. Hit your head against the wall. Who cares about the drums?
Something's gone wrong.
Yeah. Let's turn over to the walls of Jericho, where they had the horns. I think there were drums too. I think. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, modern worship is a mess, really. I think that's probably the the summation
Yeah,
of it. But
it has become a mess, and it's become a mess because it's become a very lucrative industry, and those are never going to go well together. On the
yeah.
flip side of that, I do want to speak to this real quick. There is some awesome modern music coming out. Um, Bands like City of Light are doing awesome things. The Boswells and those people. There's a lot of very good theologically rich music coming out, and even some of the mainstream people like Phil Wickham. I mean,
Mhm.
he works with some people I wouldn't want him to, and I don't know his personal like things, but some of his songs are so like ridiculously like Living Hope. I would choose Living Hope honestly over like 50% of the hymnal.
Mm.
And songs like Yet Not I Through Christ by City Light that came out like 3 years ago, I would choose that song over 90% of the hymnal. And I'm not joking. Like if you should, I would throw out I'll Fly Away any day of the week and put in a Yet Not I. Like, oh my goodness.
I'm not a
Or
fan of that song personally, but yeah.
yeah. We
I get
sang
what you mean though. Yeah.
we had a Thanksgiving service, and it was like a special thing. It wasn't a normal service, and it was just an hour, and people would stand up, say what they're thankful for, and then request a hymn out of the hymn book, and we would sing one verse of that hymn. Really
Oh, that's
cool.
cool.
Yeah, it was cool, but I didn't know probably 50% of the hymns that were sung, which is saying something since I do this.
Hmm.
And
Wow.
and there were a lot of really bad hymns. There just are. Like
I know.
I'm not trying. I think we think of
Yeah.
like, hey, this hymnal is full of theological richness, and modern music isn't. And honestly, it's half full of theological richness, and modern music is half full of theological richness. And there's
Yeah.
also terrible things in both of them. And we need to not rely on whether it's called a hymn or when it was written to say that that's scripturally sound and singable. We need to look at the
Yeah.
song, regardless of that, and judge those things, I think.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Um, all right. Well, I think we're gonna wrap up, but I want to ask you, what are your probably changes because this is your DNA. But what are your top 3 favorite songs to just you? You go to a church or you want to listen, just put on a record or listen on the radio or whatever. Um, what are your top 3 songs? Favorite songs?
Church songs or non-church songs?
Yeah, it's just yeah.
Okay, church songs. Yeah. Yet Not I But Christ Through Me is one of my favorites. That's by City Light. That's an astonishingly good song. I mean, just the title of that, Yet Not I But Christ Through Me, you can tell it's gonna be good.
Yeah.
That one's I've been really into It As Well for recently, the hymn It As Well.
Hmm.
And some people have issues because of what happened to the author later in life theologically, but the song itself, my sin not in part, but the whole. That's just an astonishing line, right? Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. And then, I mean, this one's not recent, but it's still one of my favorites. His Worship is Living Hope by Phil Wickham.
Mm.
I think it's just a great song theologically. So,
Yeah, right on. I don't know what happened to the author with It As Well.
he went kind of off the deep end theologically and kind of started a pseudo cult later in life. So, not great.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Well, thanks for ruining it for me. No.
Sorry. Just don't think about that part. He had perfectly good theology when he wrote that song. So, you're good.
Yeah, I know that's the trick. I mean, not to get into a whole new can of worms, but it's such a hard thing in the church or just Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, some of these people. Like I've watched these guys' movies or TV shows, or even Ravi Zacharias, guys like that. That you're just like, do I read the book still? Like,
Yeah.
Do I watch this? It's hard,
Yeah.
and some part of us we don't. I'm sure is the conservative, independent mindset. We don't want to be like the leftist freaks who tear down all the statues and well, that guy had slaves that one time and he talked to that person who didn't like that other person, and we have this like, rewriting history. But at the same time, it's, especially within the church. I mean, I don't want to say I celebrated, but I've often done like biographies at the beginning of a sermon. And right after Ravi Zacharias died, I just kind of did a little summation of his, and like 6-8 months later after stuff had come out, I had to, backpedal some of that. And it wasn't like a gushing, glowing review or how amazing he was, but it's still just like, yeah, sin is real. And then you kind of have to wrestle with that probably with your own conscience, whether you're going to sing that song or watch that TV show or read that book. Especially in the church or as a Christian in general, I think it's even more challenging. But anyway, where can people find you, Nathan? You said reawakenhymns.com. Is that right?
Reawakenhymns.com. Yep.
Okay.
And on all those
And
places, YouTubes and Spotify's and all those places, I'm on there.
yeah, so I listen. Yeah, I listen on Spotify or YouTube. But you mentioned like resources too. So if somebody, they're pastoring or they're part of a church, you're saying you have resources. Talk about that a little bit as we wrap up.
Sure. Yeah. So again, the point of it really, other than just because hymns are awesome, is to make sure that these are playable and available to churches who do very modern worship. I mean, the current versions I have, I did full band. They sound like a Hillsong song, but they're a hymn. Because honestly, I really like that music style. I just don't always like the theology that goes with it. So, and that's what a lot of modern players are familiar with and can play. They have guitars, they have basses, they have drums. So on my website, each hymn has a page, and you can like listen to my arrangement of it. That's all the full band modern worship feel. Same melody, same lyrics as the original hymn. And then there's like free chord sheets you can download. There's multi-tracks if you use multi-tracks. There's lyric videos. There's lead sheets. There's just anything you would need to play this hymn with a modern band in modern worship is on the website. So,
okay, nice. And do you have a place people can donate to you, or if they've been blessed by your ministry and work, can they drop you a tip or throw you some money through?
Yeah, you can do that on my website, or honestly, just buy some resources is perfectly fine. That makes me feel less guilty about getting money. So
there you go. Well, this is good, brother. I appreciate it, Nathan Drake. Thanks so much for the time.
Thank you.
God bless. All right. Hey, it's me from the thing. Hey, it's me from the thing you're currently watching. I'm doing my best, Joe Biden. No, I'm not gonna do that one. It's funny. To my own heart.